Thank you for the welcome, ladies and gentlemen. In January this year, The Spectator published an article called "This is UKIP's Britain, we all just live in it." And they're right. In it, they say, both Labour and the Conservatives spent years saying, in effect, UKIP are right, but for God's sake, don't vote for them. Understandable. So I haven't really prepared a speech I'm going to talk about verbatim even, sorry. There are many things that are verboten, and we're going to get onto those very shortly. So the question really, I think this is ultimately the entire question that the country's facing, that nobody really seems to have the wherewithal to put it out there. Who gets to decide who runs society? That's the main question. And if that wasn't the main question, we wouldn't be having discussions about things like hate speech laws. No such thing would exist. The reason these things do exist is because there is a faction in our society who genuinely believe that they get to determine what is right and wrong for you to say, not you. Now, this is a real problem for me because that's an expression of a fundamentally intolerant society. If some things must not or cannot be said due to legal punishment for anyone who does say them, even if it's in jest, then you have to ask yourself what is it that they are trying to repress. So, I've been accused of being a Thatcherite, which I find quite amusing because, I agree with Margaret Thatcher's position on, say, Europe. They are indeed a weak lot. And I definitely agree with her position on defending sovereign British territory, but I don't agree with her when she says there's no such thing as society. There is. There definitely is. Now, a political scientist or a political philosopher might define it as the spontaneous expression of cultural interactions between individuals operating within social groups. You'll notice how I had that written down. These are what we might call communities. And we talk about communities all the time, everywhere. What about the Jewish community, the black community, the LGBT community? Well, okay, let's talk about communities. Most of these communities really are just a selection of people who are being based on an actual characteristic, not what a normal person would recognize as a community, built around a certain location with people who know each other and feel that they belong in that location. These are actually extended groups that are being used as a kind of net to just catch a bunch of people who don't even know that they're being represented by this person speaking for them. But the point is, the fundamental bedrock of a tolerant society is that we're able to actually have those interpersonal negotiations that make up the kind of natural friction that happens between communities. And this happens all the time, everywhere we go. If we've got some protesters outside, here's an example. The sort of more libertarian-minded people here versus the Stalinists out there. I don't like using the term Stalinist. You think, well, that's uncharitable. And then you see the Soviet flags and you think, is it possible to take a photograph of Jeremy Corbyn without a Soviet flag in the background? Anyway. This is the problem with the kind of managerial class of our society. They genuinely think they can organize things better than you, the people who are actually living and being what we call society. And this is something that, this has been predicted by various sort of science fiction writers from 100 years ago, where they would say there would be some kind of revolt of the scientists, where a technocratic class would try and take over, given the wonders of modern technology, the incredibly advanced statistical gathering methods that we have. And they would list it all down. They would look at it on paper and say, wait, I can do a better job of this, which in my opinion is the height of hubris. The idea that a person who has a social science degree from the University of Bath knows how to run your life better than you, is obviously doomed to failure. So I think that the problem that they have is a lack of information. And I think it will always be a lack of information because to be able to actually, ignore the idea of the moral concerns regarding the right someone else has to manage your social interactions with other people. Obviously they have absolutely none. But let's assume for a second they can somehow find some justification. It's obvious that they don't have the capacity to be able to figure out how exactly you should do these things. They're not going to be able to find a standard set of rules because everyone is different. Some people will make offensive jokes and end up on the verge of going to jail for it. And a bunch of people, I mean, is there anyone in here who felt offended by Count Dankula's video? No. No? Oh, right, one person over there. but that's the point. According to the British legal system, that's a criminal. According to everyone else, I mean like literally everyone else, that's a shit poster. And that's really what it comes down to. Now, speaking specifically of, I guess we would call them Islamist communities in the north, particularly culturally Islamic, isolationist, and honestly, in many ways, aggressive communities that we've allowed to just spring up without us being able to have the kind of cultural negotiations we would normally have with a group of people who have moved to an area. And this happens everywhere, in every society. This is not unique to us. This is how humans interact. These haven't been able to be had because the objection to the behaviors that we see expressed by people in these communities is always considered to be a form of racism. This, in my opinion, is just the most perfect proof that the technocrats, the social scientists, who would like to tell you how you must run your lives in order to properly manage the world, don't understand why you do what you do. The objection is obviously not down to the race of these people. It's obviously down to the culture of these people. And if you believe that culture and race are inextricable, welcome to the alt-right. That's their opinion. The problem is that the negotiation is usually two-sided. One person gives, one person takes, and then in response, the other person takes and the other person gives. It's a compromise, a negotiation. We usually use the phrase to sum this up, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. And the response, the likewise, of course, when in Britain, you do as the British do. It's a give and take. Now, this is not only the most, in my opinion, moral way of operating a society, expecting and giving in return. It's a recognition of the agency of the people you're talking to. It's a recognition of the, I guess you would call it the social power of the dominant wider society. It's an acknowledgement that that needs to at least modify itself in some way to accept the newcomers. It's inevitable. Everyone has to do this. And it's the implicit pact of tolerance to say, right, we will tolerate your strange culture. We're happy to. As long as you can agree to certain values, you're not going to just randomly hurt people, you're going to obey the laws of the land. Are we still good? Right. You're going to obey the laws of the land and whatnot. That's obviously normal. The exchange for that is that you moderate your excesses in order to account for ours. The explicit exchange in this pact is that we will tolerate your strangeness and you will moderate. This is the globalist, isn't it? The thing that the minority communities will do in exchange is moderate their excessive and the excess of their differences. They won't try to be as different and strange as possible in order to not offend the sensibilities of the people with whom they are now living. And this is obviously what everyone would expect. I mean, if you were to move to another country, you'd be expected to learn the language. If you move to another country, you would be expected to follow their social norms. For example, if you're a married man and you take your wife to somewhere quite extreme, like Saudi Arabia, the police of vice and virtue will come up to you and tell you that your woman must be covered up, because that's what you do in that country. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to make sure you do that, because otherwise the people around you are going to find you strange and offensive, and they will actively try to get themselves away from you and reject you from their society. Now, wouldn't it be strange if the government of that country actually then turned on its own citizens and said, no, your comfort in your own society is actually completely irrelevant to us. What matters is that the normal people who are just making up the average everyday person's interactions in society are actually mediated and moderated to protect the feelings of the people who have just arrived. That, to me, is the strangest conception. Should we give them a second, see if they can figure out what's going on? Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Great.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay.
If I was expecting professionalism, I would have worn a suit. I'm sorry, that wasn't meant to be a dig. Look, Yeah, you have to understand, I considered that to be a compliment. The last thing that I would want to be a part of is a professional political party. And I honestly, no, I genuinely mean this, right? No, let me explain that, right? Because that is, in fact, the entire failure of our political class. It's this kind of elitist attitude, the idea that they can actually separate themselves from the demos and say, we are not a part of you, we are in fact something superior to you. We are in fact, we know better than you. That's entirely the problem. My experience in UKIP has been, frankly, like just normal, homely, and I've felt so encouraged by the fact that UKIP is the regular person's political party. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the things that Steve Bannon, the Lord of Darkness to the globalists, a lot of the things he's been saying have been really resonating with me. Because really, we as activists, and you are all activists if you're here, and I'm sure you already know that, our goal, our job, is effectively to sell populism to the middle class. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, exactly, how the hell are we going to do that? Well, I don't know, frankly, so I don't know why I'm up here. No. It's not going to be easy, and there are going to be many hurdles to overcome. And the main problem that we've got there is the innate middle-class bigotry against the working class. You see this in the response to Tommy Robinson's supporters. Now, instead of these people saying, wow, look at this, Tommy Robinson can get 20,000 people outside of Downing Street in London. People from the north, people who don't have money to burn, but they come down anyway because they have a problem that is so drastic, so dire, that they're actually willing to spend their hard-earned money and give up a day to come down and chant, "Oi, Tommy, Tommy," at Theresa May. Now, there are two ways of looking at these people. You can either look at them as an existential threat to the perfect globalist, politically correct order that they are trying to engineer in this country, or you can look at them with empathy and say, they are my fellow countrymen and they are suffering. They are suffering because they have nowhere else to go. The situation, the straits have become so dire that they are crying out for representation. And who can represent them if not the People's Party? Now, it's no great surprise that there is so much crackdown on alternative media voices. I'm sure you all heard that, was it yesterday, PayPal decided to pull Tommy Robinson's account from their services because he's a wrong thinker and he must be stopped. The establishment is well aware that the sand underneath their feet is shifting. They realize that there is something happening, and it's something outside of their control. And this is actually something the BBC brought up to me when I was doing my 3-hour interview with them that they used 4 minutes of. They know that things are changing, and they know that people like me, Dan Keeler, Paul Joseph Watson, and not just us, but like the thousands of people on social media who in their own individual small ways, even if you post something on social media, even if 50 people see it, if 10,000 of you post that, then you've got an awful lot of people who are suddenly becoming exposed to these kind of dissident ideas about trying to get the country on its own side for once. Because I mean, like this is the great betrayal of the Ramonas. They know that they lost the vote. They know they lost it fair and square. And they know that the country has to pull together in a time of crisis over Brexit. Nobody is more afraid of Brexit than the politically correct Remainer class. Nobody. And yet every single day they publish article after article intending to whip up fear to make Britain's position in negotiating with the European Union weaker and weaker and weaker. It is incumbent on us as a citizenry to all, regardless of how you feel about Brexit, say, well, that's how we voted, so now it's us versus Europe, and we can't sit there and betray ourselves over it. We have to be united on this. The reason that they're going to come for you, and they are going to come for every single one of you eventually, because the more we succeed, the weaker they become until, frankly, their world order comes down. And suddenly, we don't end up going to jail for our tweets or our jokes. And that ultimately is that's ultimately my aim in joining UKIP. I want to get hate speech laws repealed. I want to get the 2003 Communication Act Article 127 repealed, and I want to make it so people are free to offend one another again, because it's in this instances of being offended that we end up figuring out how we want to be spoken to with each other. And if we can't offend one another without going to jail, we can't speak out. We end up with this chilling effect. And yeah, you might offend some of your friends on social media, and they'll tell you about that, and then you can have the discussion with them personally. I don't want to sit there and say all of society has to be run this one way. I want to remove the authoritarian way that the radical left, frankly, are trying to make us run society along their lines. I think we are the ones who should decide that, and I don't think they are. Thank you very much.